And we're live. Welcome everyone to another NPM RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, August the 3rd. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in RFC issue, I believe it's 621. For folks that are on the call, feel free to add yourselves to the attendees list in the meeting notes doc that I shared. Quick reminder that these calls and all comms on the RFC's repo are covered under code of conduct. We ask you to please be kind while you're on these calls. Raise your hand if someone else is speaking, and just overall, please be mindful of others and respectful of others. This stream is streamed live on YouTube and recorded, so just be mindful of that as well. Quick announcements. So our team just launched NPM v8.16. So some folks on this call helped a lot with this. Roy Adorno, our former team member who did a bunch of the work. Michael Garvin did a ton of the work as well to pick up after Roy as well. And we got over the finish line here today. We're going to make some noise about it this afternoon and have a blog post or a changelog post out on GitHub for folks to learn a bit more about NPM query, the dependency selector syntax that we've implemented, and also future iterations we want to make and improvements we want to make to it and the selector syntax. So quite a great day. We're really excited about what this means and what we can do with NPM query. So just wanted to share that with folks. Who are very interested about what we can do in terms of expanding the syntax as well. So there's lots of work ahead of us. Yeah, very excited. Did anybody else have any other announcements they want to share?
The document's different today. No one can edit it without being logged in. A lot of people don't want to log in.
Let me quickly change that. If you refresh or try now, you should be able to edit and add yourselves. I don't want to force you to have a HackMD account, don't worry. Any other announcements from folks? If not, Roy, you said you want to add an item to the agenda. Just want to make sure we capture that. We can even start with that since you're here.
Yeah. I actually went ahead and put it in the agenda there, the first item there. But yeah, let me go quick. Feel free to time box the conversation here, because I just kind of want to get some pointers. So basically, Laurent is from the Google Open Source Security team. I invited him over to come and chat with you folks too. And yeah, and I think basically they're building an entire suite of signing. And I'll let him talk about more of that aspect. But I was thinking how I believe there is an opportunity here to continue on expanding on Audit. And I know we recently added Audit signatures to check for signatures. And they're building an entire security framework that can be also validated. So I believe there's an opportunity to maybe continue to expand Audit to also check for all that extra validation. And I know that, yeah, Laurent, why don't you talk a little bit more about the Salsa Initiative?
Yeah. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Laurent. I'm in Google. I've heard about Jordan via the NPM best practices and scorecard as well. Good to see you in person. So I don't know how many of you have heard of the initiative called the Salsa, SLSA, and Six Store. You have?
Yeah, so maybe I should speak to this a little bit before you get too ahead of it. We actually might be discussing this quite a lot next week. We actually have been doing a lot of internal investigation into Salsa, Six Store, and a number of other competing as well, Notary services, Notary V2, Azure just came out with a ACL. Yeah, we've been talking about this quite a lot internally. We have a bunch of documents that we would love to share and can speak to a little bit more in the next week or so. And by the way, we will be speaking to them in this forum. So this is the right place to be if you want to continue to collaborate with us. I think what Roy's speaking to in terms of improvements to audit, that is also something on our roadmap, something that we're considering in terms of like what we can do to continue to improve that experience. For us, this group specifically, though, I think wants to ensure that we do it in a sort of holistic way and we're not just sort of doing it piecemeal. I think there is, and just personally, and I'll say my piece and then let you continue, Laurent. Specifically with Salsa, I'm a bit concerned about the state in which the steps are at right now. It's not Salsa V1 yet, right? And they also don't have any sort of guidance or recommendations or accreditation for getting to, let's say, Salsa level 3 in place yet. And I know that there's a lot of work happening, working groups happening in the Open SSF to deal with, SIG-Store and talking about package signing, package integrity, ecosystem, supply chain integrity. And our team is very much aware and very much wanting to work with those teams to improve the state of, supply chain integrity. Signing is just one piece of that. We have in the last year talked about trying to work towards immutable installs, immutable installation. And I think that will, if we get to that place, that's actually much more of a win for us in terms of eventual SBOM creation and actually trust within between different installations. The idea of like trusted builders and trying to tie a package artifact back to a source repo is a little bit like I've been pushing back on this a little bit because of those attestations. And we can talk about that more next week. I think more like there will be clearly something that I can speak to more the next week, but just wanted to get ahead of, I think, some of this conversation, but feel free to maybe explain more about maybe the work that you're doing, what else you would like to present, Mark. Yeah.
Right. No, that's really good context. So you're right about SIG-Store. It's not yet GA. I think they're going to announce it in October. So they're still, I guess, cleaning up and productionizing the SIG-Store. So that's correct. Accreditation also, yeah, you're correct. Like the levels, I guess the current view that we have is that we kind of trust GitHub. So if you build on GitHub, we kind of trust it. If you build on something like GCB, we also kind of trust it. So I guess the levels is something that's making a lot of noise and it's complicating things. And I think V1 of the specs is going to try to clarify a lot of things around that. So I guess that's what I can say about SIG-Store. So where I'm more involved in is actually builders. So I guess you touched upon builders. So we have builders that run on natively on GitHub. We did a blog post with Jose Palafox 3 months ago. And we have, so basically we just use, it's native on GitHub. We use reusable workflows to get isolation. And then we can basically make this a trusted builder. So yeah, what I was coming to talk about, and it's probably for next week, is we'd like to have a builder for NPM. We don't think it's very difficult, but you would get automatic provenance generation and a binding to the original repository, which might be something that GitHub gets for free, but I guess the rest of the community doesn't. And yeah, it's basically just an extension of the signature. I mean, instead of just signing the binary, or like the tarball, you just sign the tarball and a little bit more metadata. And yeah, that's kind of what we were trying to do, because I saw that you announced support for SIG-Store. And so I guess the only thing that we wanted to do is create the builder and then let NPM decide where everything lives, and let the client decide what they can download it like a signature. Or, yeah, so that's kind of the context that that I have.
I'll let Jordan go, and then I will correct one thing. In terms of the support that you speak to, at least before I let Jordan go here, the support with GitHub, I think we're supporting exploration. I would not say that, at least within NPM, we're exploring this area for sure. We're supporting the Open SSF for sure. We've made investments there. We have time and definitely dedicated resources to Open SSF and all the different working groups there. In terms of one particular technology, I would say that we are exploring that, and we're exploring sort of the proposals around what these build attestations and things look like. So that's what I can speak to there without explaining more. And just want to correct the fact that, like, as far as I know, like our team hasn't said anything. If there's a separate something else coming from the company, that's different than what our team can speak to right now. But Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah. So just I think there's been a lot of unsaid explanation for anyone who might be watching the stream. My understanding is that there is a hope to be able to look at an NPM package and provide some sort of confidence about whether the stuff shipped in the NPM package came from the GitHub repo it links to. With an NPM package that doesn't have a build process, that's usually pretty easy because you just compare the contents and they match or they don't. With a package that has a build process, which is, I don't actually think is the majority, but it is certainly some of the, like, a significant percentage of the largest used direct dependencies that people choose. And, you know, so it's not a small contingent. It's difficult. And part of the reason it's difficult is because there isn't a build process of record for the JavaScript community there. And all of the build processes have lots of configuration options. And unless you have the exact dependency graph and configuration options that a package has used, you have zero hope of being able to replicate its build process. And so that means every individual version of Babel and its dependencies, or TypeScript or whatever, plus every individual permutation of the TypeScript or Babel configs. Some people, like, yeah, I mean, just in packages, I think that alone is a pretty large problem. And I think that while certainly GitHub is in a position, as you know, to let a package author choose to do its publishes and builds on a controlled system, that would sort of solve the problem, because then you have a chain of custody. But that's not practical for the majority of NPM, which would need this sort of attestation as well. And so I think I've had lots of the conversations with folks in the ecosystem about this topic over the last year. And I think that really the only viable approach is trying to look at a published package and its GitHub repo and doing your best to try to replicate the build process, and then applying heuristics to see how close you think it is. And, you know, you could pull in human review, but you would desperately not want false positives, because even more so than CVEs, a false positive is worse than a false negative, because it, you know, erodes trust in the ecosystem. So I think that the underlying goal is great, but I'm very skeptical that there is a path to it that isn't long and wildly expensive, and that isn't fraught with the risk of accidental false positives torpedoing the entire effort.
Yeah. What I will say is, just because we don't have an RFC yet here that we're speaking to, like, we should, and Royce noted this at the beginning, like, we should probably time box this. Just the fact that we're putting this on our radar, though, I think is important. And I share what you just said, Jordan. I share much of your skepticism, and have shared that internally, as well as we'll be sharing, you know, obviously externally. But at the same time, I also am hopeful, right? Like, a lot of this work is pointing in the right direction, that we're trying to prevent supply chain attacks. We're trying to give more trust to consumers, and trying to create, you know, links that I think are important and do make sense in a lot of cases back to source repositories and packages and their artifacts. And there's a bunch of different ways that we can try to get there. And I do appreciate the work that has been coming out of Google, ChainGuard, you know, Open SSF. Like, they've been pushing some new innovative ideas, based also, if anybody has looked up historically, like the Tough framework, etc. And also, if you look at how NPM has an updated model, we, you know, I think we're definitely positioned to try to help solve some of these problems. And yeah, we can speak more to this, I think, once we have a proposal, and I can promise you that there will be some more to talk about likely next week. Is that good?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. And thank you so much for showing up, and hopefully we see you next week as well, Laurent. What's the team you're on specifically? Just the open source security team?
Yeah, the Google open source security team.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's just called Ghost, GOSST.
Okay. Yeah, I know of your team. Yeah, I believe there's folks internally that are working closely with you folks or have talked with you for sure. So cool.
Yeah, I think we talked to Trevor, and yeah, cool. Well, I'll see you next week or in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we meet every
Weekly.
week. Yeah, weekly. It will depend upon announcements and things being opened up. But I can just tell you, based on how things have been going, that it's likely we'll be speaking about this topic next week. Cool. Want to quickly move on. I know Arch FS or FZ, sorry. You had joined. I believe we had one of your items. I want to bump it to the top here of the agenda. This is the adding support for a CPU or OS flag to install basically for specific platforms. I saw this issue open up almost a month ago, and I just wanted to make sure that we got some visibility. I know, Jordan, you've given some feedback on this as well, but maybe you can speak to it yourself, Fodor.
Yes, so can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Maybe basically I just joined this meeting if something needs to be clarified on what was requested.
Jordan, I think you were the one primarily giving feedback. I haven't had, I'll be honest, I apologize. I haven't had time to review this fully, like the feedback that I know Jordan was giving, but maybe you can speak to it.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a few questions, right? Like, it seems thankfully the number of packages that require compilation are minimal. That is definitely a best practice to avoid needing that, but some do for real justification, justified reasons. Generally speaking, though, what I was trying to tease out was my understanding was that if I am not on the correct OS and CPU, I can't build it for that OS and CPU, and the thing I build isn't going to work if I tried to fake it. And so I was curious. I was just trying to understand, like, what's the point? Like, why, there was a little, I wasn't sure I understood your explanation. And so I didn't reply after that because I wanted to try to understand it before that. But
yeah, so
it's,
have you guys heard of Wine on Linux?
Sure.
So using Wine, you can actually build cross-platform from Linux, and we actually are using this. So Electron, probably you heard about it, and there's a package for Electron to build. It's called Electron Builder that can do building for Windows from Linux using Wine. And basically,
shouldn't the OS be Windows when using Wine?
No. Wine is actually made for Linux, so you can actually run programs that were made for Windows. But it also helps to actually build applications for Windows from Linux.
Okay.
And since the main reason here is that a lot of new packages on NPM who basically build native modules have started using this way that they publish multiple packages, and each package is for that specific OS and CPU, and only the ones are installed that are correct for the current platform. But this doesn't work with multi-platform builds or cross-platform builds.
Right. So you want to wait to opt into and bypass the checks that we're doing essentially. Is that's kind of what you're speaking to, right? Like, so in terms of the optional depth strategy, because this speaks actually, what you're asking for speaks to like package distributions that we're trying to solve for a bit more holistically. But the current strategy that you're speaking to is that some packages define or ask you to define a whole bunch of optional dependencies and then utilize the package manager's checks to essentially fail in the specific environment. And you want to essentially bypass those checks to specifically, target or create builds for those specific platforms. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's very accurate. From my understanding, this feature shouldn't be very complicated. It just should use the ones from the arguments instead of the actual operating system arguments.
Yeah, like we could bike shed the name like of the bypass, but you want to say ignore check, like the CPU check, right? And like, or specifically you want to enforce the CPU to be a specific type. Is that accurate?
I would only need it for the optional dependencies when optional dependencies are decided to be installed or not. I would like to also say that this is not a high priority thing. If more people are coming from the community and asking for this, it should go ahead. Currently, I resolved my issue by basically not using this optional dependency way of installing packages. The idea is that the Rust community is recommending this way, but in the end, we opted to basically build all the different platforms and package it in a single package.
Go ahead, Gar.
If I understand correctly, what this is effectively doing is allowing us to get params passed into Node.js. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if it shouldn't be related to Node. It should only be related to npm choosing the optional dependencies that are installed.
But what does it change? What happens differently if I add that flag?
Well, you know that package JSON for the packages can define for what operating system and CPU they are compatible with, basically. And this would basically change which optional dependencies are installed.
I think, yeah, I think that right now we gate essentially based on the process information. So if like we see a DOS or the CPU information there is mismatched with the support that's defined in the package JSON on the optional depth, then we throw. I think there's a missing config that exists for us to disable or like overwrite those checks. I think that's what we're missing right now, or we could potentially introduce that would help support this. But go ahead, Roy, I see your hands up as well.
Yeah, I think this is can also tied with the distribution in RFC. Like because kind of the base for that is the optional dependencies, and it might be useful. Yeah, it might be useful if you want to be able to test different binaries in just different systems. So I think it might make sense. Yeah, it might make sense to just keep this in mind and like try to prioritize.
Yeah, so it's like user defined versus like respecting what's in the package, right? Like the consumer defined, I guess you can say, like consumer defined CPU config to allow you to get an optional depth package that's different than what we're using to like, yeah. I think it could be a part and likely should be a part of the package distributions work. Yeah. Gar, I'm not sure if your comments or questions were fully resolved.
Yeah, I think I understand. So we currently have a way in optional dependencies to limit by OS and architecture. Is that something that exists right now? And this would allow you to make NPM think those conditions are different. That does, as that, it does make sense. I mean, we can like shed the names and all that, but.
Yeah, like we'll throw and essentially fail to install a dependency if we see like that mismatch. Yeah, so this is trying to work around that. Go ahead, sure.
My only concern is if those dependencies are also using something like Node.js, you're going to have to also tell it to build for the other arc.
Yeah, and so that information I think is usually pulled out of process. So like you could potentially, I guess, yeah, I don't know.
Well, that's outside the scope of, you can do that with
Yeah.
environment variables, but
Right.
like, and there's no way for NPM to know if that needs to happen. This is like a user beware at this point. It seems dangerous because there's assumptions that those dependency builders are going to have that aren't true when it comes time to run Node.js.
Go ahead, Jordan, if you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think if the only, it makes sense to me, the use case that was explained. And I think that, but if that's the only use case we know of, then I think we should be very careful to put in the documentation that like, this is the use case that these flags were designed for. And if you're not doing that, you probably shouldn't use these flags. And if you have any use cases, please communicate them to the NPM team or something like that, because I don't know, it just, I can, if I had published a package that needed to that had optional dependencies that were OS or CPU dependent, I would probably expect a bunch of bug reports from people that thought that using those flags was a way to fix their problem. That's not a reason not to support it. It still seems worth supporting, but it seems like documentation warnings at least would be nice.
Go ahead, Arch.
Since I'm the first one requesting this feature, I would recommend to wait to see if more people need this. Because basically we resolved this for ourselves and it's functioning in another way. And we should see, probably the community will grow with native module packages using these optional dependencies, and probably then people will also come and requesting this. If not, then it's not worth focusing on this at this point.
I appreciate that thought as well. That's good. Awesome. Is there anything else you want to add other than that? I think it'd be great to get your feedback and insight if you've looked at the package distributions RC. We have some work to do, I think, around optional dependencies in general that has been on hold for a while just because of my limited capacity to go write a separate RC for expanding our support and sort of modifying what we do with optional dependencies. But I think that's a good thread if you're interested in this sort of area and kind of interested in what we might do down the line in the future with essentially package distributions, variants, and how you might be able to specify them in the future or manage them in the future. So yeah, that's I guess my only feedback there.
Yeah, so from my side, I don't really have a feedback. I'm quite new to actually using these optional dependencies, and I have actually learned it from the Rust community recommending this. So I don't have any feedback.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for jumping on the call today and talking us through the issue. I just want to quickly move on to the next item we had, which was 6.2020, the RFC for NPM init, adding a new question. We've had this come up before. This is for the type common.js or module. I believe we have spoken about this, had multiple discussions about this. I saw Roy, you had jumped in here as well as Jordan to give some feedback. I'm not sure if either of you want to speak to this.
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the biggest problems with type module is that most people misunderstand it to be necessary to use ESM. It is not necessary at all, and no one ever needs to use it, and everything works fine. The only thing that it does is makes .js files treated as ESM instead of common.js. But you can always do .cjs or .mjs, and you'll get the expected format. So I think that adding this as a question to all new users who almost certainly will not understand the subtleties of Node's ESM integration, which still has a lot of gaps in its feature set and is still very unapproachable for newcomers. I think having that as a question is going to cause way more confusion than it solves. Always, I think that the type field should just not be used, and if people want to use ESM, they should use .mjs files. And I don't think there's any point in npm init. Like I don't think there's any benefit in npm init asking that question. I don't care if somebody wants to override it by a command line arg. Like that's fine, right? Like I think, but it just, people should never see that information, I think, because it just confuses everyone, and it's not required. So
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with the sentiment, but I definitely agree with the part where it's hard today, right? It's in a difficult place today, the ESM support. But moving forward, I believe it's probably going to be the future, right?
And it may be, but type module is not required for any use of ESM, right? All they have to learn, which they do have to learn something, is that .mjs is ESM files. That's it. And then there's no need for the type field. And all existing tooling works fine, right? So I'm not even though I have lots of skepticism about ESM itself being the default, that is a totally unrelated philosophical debate here.
Yeah.
Even if literally everyone shifts to ESM within the next year, which of course won't happen, but let's say everyone does that, you still will never need the type field to be set to module. No one ever needs that.
Not for your package, JC.
Well, nobody needs that ever anywhere unless they have some aesthetic obsession with .js meaning ESM. That's the only purpose of that flag. Like I was in the working group for years where we discussed it. That is the only reason people wanted that flag. That's the only purpose it serves. And that doesn't help newcomers. They don't need to be attached to legacy aesthetic preferences from previous decades. And yes, .mjs absolutely has its own MIME type. It's like an official thing. That is the thing. So like, it's unrelated to the migration to ESM and when or if that will ever happen. It is just, it's an added complication that newcomers shouldn't ever have to see, is my opinion.
Go ahead, Per.
I've been part of discussions in the past about adding things to npm init, and we've always erred on the side of no, go make a module for it. And I think what the questions we ask now are locked. We should not add to that. They're all that's required and some extra, but for backwards compatibility to make a package JSON. And I think if we ever want to have anything more, it's going to be a different way to declare, also without having to make your own package, a different way to declare these fields also should be in my package JSON, which could be its own thing, but that's the direction I think we could support. Anything else, I don't know that I am in favor of adding any new questions to that command ever, just because of the can of worms that it represents. If we want to support that, it needs to be something we support dynamically, like a way to support all the ones anyone would want by adding something somewhere themselves without having to publish the module. So that makes sense.
So my hand is raised just to reply to that. For individual fields, maybe that position makes sense. I definitely have a question I want eventually to be added to npm init, but it's not controlling one field. Is this an application or a package? Are you intending to publish this thing or deploy and run this thing? And because that will set some different fields, but because that actually is asking about intent, which is different. And so we can debate that at future RFCs.
Yeah, and I remember that discussion. And that
I just want to make sure that there's no implication that like there's a ban on any changes to npm init, but more that like that we can discuss that in the future, but that like, yeah. So, thank you.
I think I agree with everybody. I don't think I don't dissent from anybody. What I would say is that this group unfortunately represents a very small part of the ecosystem, and very much we are different power users and also legacy users of this tooling, right? So net new as somebody who's just getting started in JavaScript and Node, potentially has different, different needs than we do. And as maintainers of this piece of software that we understand is likely people's first method or way of interacting with the ecosystem and packages and creating their own packages, getting started creating their own packages, we should just be mindful of that persona that is not us, right? Like just to help, I think, level set everybody's like own biases. Like we should always think who's the complete opposite of who I am as a developer, and what are their needs, and how does that differ from sort of the recommendations we're making. I think exactly to your point, Jordan, about that question about who am I as a consumer, or if want to be a maintainer, that might be even tough to answer for somebody who's new, right? Like, so that's why, we have to always think about that through that lens. Like, I think for a lot of us, it becomes a power tool, and we can configure it once we know how to answer all those questions very easily. But it's sort of the gateway, at least for somebody starting a brand new project. It might be the first place that they start, like, using our tool. So go ahead.
Yeah, it's just that something Gar mentioned real quick and made me think, because I left that example using PKG SAT to just put the type module in your package JSON if you want. So maybe just a way to just template, like give more power over running npm init, and then like kind of a template of some sort that you can drop in your npm RFC that just like allows you to do a bunch of npm pkg set for things that you usually want to have. It could be a neat idea, but it's just, for now, it's just like very vague idea. Maybe that can evolve into an actual RFC or an RFC. I don't know.
It's an init template, right? So far, we've always asked, we only have the ability for you to configure an init module. It sounds like an init, which is very heavy-handed, right? Like that sounds very heavy-handed. I think what you're speaking to.
There is that. I forgot about that.
Right. So you can use an init module today, and you can, like, that's what a lot of people do. But what might be more like a bit kinder, a little bit easier and friendlier to end users might be, like a template, like an init template or package JSON fields that will be more than what we do today to allow you to configure more fields than you do today. And maybe like arbitrary numbers of fields. And we utilize, as you say, under the hood, npm pkg or the package JSON module that you built to set those by default, right? So that may be like, we could spec that out, and that might be easier. It's like a good middle ground between go create a whole new module for your template, which is not great experience, like, because then you have to publish this thing, versus here's limited configuration we'll give you to modify these known fields. I think there's something in between those two options for users, which is maybe here's a way you can specify arbitrary package JSON or JSON, and we will set that for you, or those fields, arbitrary fields for your initial package JSON, and we will set those fields for you. And that's what npm init does, or init template does. I think there's something there, like in terms of a middle ground. But in terms of this question specifically, I think we've talked it to death. I'm very much on, I guess, Jordan's side here in terms of the need from the community to adopt type modules is not a need. So asking that question, I think, is just, it causes more confusion. Now, I would love for us to, though, create some documentation, maybe to help the community understand the current state of modules, like, and to, again, maybe we can do something within npm to essentially support MJS files, or to give you some sort of like information about the fact that you're mismatched in terms of like the type of dependencies you have, or like, can you or can't you, like, it gets into the concept of like, are we a runtime, or are we going to help with building your dependencies? But I feel like we should be helping you figure out if you're in like a broken state. As a package manager, we should help you get the right packages into your project. And if you can't use a specific package because it's ESM or whatever, and you're gonna have to change your code, that's breaking for you, and we should be able to help you like figure that out. So I feel like we are going to eventually bleed into that area in terms of like runtime and build just to be able to get some analysis out of packages to help you. But yeah, I think there is a future where we help the community sort of adopt ESM in a way that like we also don't we protect people that might be broken by adopting it, right? So I don't know. Any other thoughts or feedback on this one? I think we could probably close it as a dupe. I'm not sure if somebody else wants to do that, or we can just like flag it specifically and sort of speak to options that we have in terms of creating an RFC for specifically like the template, like what you're speaking to, Roy, I think is a great idea. Like, hey, we could leverage PKG somehow to let you set arbitrary JSON or configure that. So that's one opportunity if the person's interested in creating an RFC for that. So cool. We only have about 15 minutes left, and I know there's a number of extra items on the agenda today. Roy, since you're here, maybe we can bubble up your add the query command. Can we take this off the agenda? I think it closed, right? Like we can take the agenda label off this PR.
Yeah, you're talking about query?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, PR 5000, awesome. Yeah, thanks Gar for making it, pushing it across the finish line. I'm sure it was way more work than yeah, than it seemed in the beginning.
Well, you know, we just found bugs at the 11th hour. That's fine. That's how that works.
Bugs I added, not you. When I went to do case and sensitivity, I made things go sideways on attribute checking.
Yeah, but you also fixed a lot of bugs.
Yeah, great to know it was not only me adding all the bugs.
Cool. Moving on from that, Fritzy, since you're here as well, I'll pull up your RFC about exportable config. I'm not sure if you want to give an update here, or if there is one to even give. This is the 615 RFC, exportable config definitions. I see, Gar, your hand's up. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, this is like old lore. This has always been the intention. Back when I started, I pointed out that config shouldn't live in two different places. We basically just need to consolidate our config into one area. I don't even think this needs to be an RFC. This is on our agenda. We just need to make sure this is represented in status board so we know it's the direction we're going. This is already something we already decided to do.
So can we just convert this into an issue in status board? Just a tracking issue? Cool. Okay.
Please do.
I have an idea. I'll probably chime in that issue there. But there is this place in that shim for Windows, and I believe even in one of the binaries for where it calls the binary itself to figure out the global prefix in order to auto update, right? Like maybe we can spawn like a smaller CLI that just returns the global prefix and use that instead of spawning the entire CLI again.
Okay, we'll plant that seed in our heads.
I don't think I follow because my brain is exhausted.
Basically, something that NPM has access to. I don't know if it's a bin or something for Windows to bootstrap itself, to call that instead of the full CLI to find with a prefix when it does its little prefix dance. He's saying once our config is exported, all we need is that and 3 lines of code to do that little dance, and then we could call the proper npm. Yeah, so that could be something that falls out of that eventually. Sure, we'll just plant that seed in our heads.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we assign it to you. That's right. That's what happens. Is it's open source, right? You can continue. Yeah. Cool. We have about 11 minutes left. Let's jump in and see if we can get to a few other of these ones that got pulled up. There was this RRFC 619, a new CI flag for npm outdated command. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I think we should shed the name. I think CI is confusing. And we need to do this with the flag that we want to add to npm query in mind, because that feels like a similar thing. And if you recall npm query, we want to add a flag that makes it change status codes based on if it found anything or not. And now we're talking about making npm outdated change status codes based on if it found anything or not. So I would just think that let's go forward with this, put that flag on both those commands, and name it in a way that makes sense for that context.
Right, something that deals with the exit code more holistically. Go ahead, Jordan.
Well, and I mean, another alternative would be for npm 9 or whatever, like reevaluating. Like, I feel like the default command behavior of every command on the shell should be, if it worked, give a 0, and if it didn't, give a non-zero. And like, maybe, I don't know, I haven't thought about it too hard for npm outdated, but like, maybe npm outdated should just do this stuff by default, and people who don't want that behavior can just use decade-old shell idioms to, get whatever exit code they want. Like, we still might want a flag or something in npm 8 for it, but yeah, just I'm not sure. My suspicion is that if all of these things are audited, that there won't actually end up being any use cases for anything except having the exit codes be proper for whatever that's deemed to be for each command.
I think if we change the defaults, we still need the flag, because I remember triaging a lot of issues for things that exit uncleanly that people still wanted to be able to use, and they needed a mechanism to turn that off. So,
but like in the shell, you just do like colon pipes or something like that. Like there's like a bunch of conventions you use if you get a non-zero exit code and you want to pretend it's 0.
npm itself, when it calls things, has defaults that you can't really do anything about. So we just need a way to turn it off.
Thank you for
clarifying. Any other feedback on this? If not, we can quickly jump on to the next RFC. This was 618. So this is npm debug command from about code. I'm not sure if anybody got a chance to review this. It just came up about 5 days ago, so within the last week. I'll share it here for folks if you want to take a chance to look at it. And I apologize, Owen, I just want to say, Owen, I see your comment here from the earlier discussion about leveraging wrappers, generators, and APIs for I think that's npm init you're speaking to there. So yeah. Go ahead and go.
Just looking at it, it looks like a new lifecycle event, because there's a part in there given the script debug property. I would only recommend that we treat that like a lifecycle event, so it does pre-debug and post, and not just debug, just so that we're not getting into the case of, I think, what's the command, npm start, that's this, or npm env, which is this weird thing that runs one thing if the script's present and another thing if there isn't. We should be really intentional about this is a life cycle event. It's run in addition to all the other stuff it does. It's not an else.
Okay.
That would be my only caveat.
Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, so I'm commenting one thing, which is about like, so in general, I think this is interesting. It is really annoying to like you can set the node options environment variable and set inspect break and then just do whatever you want and it just works. So like that would be a workaround to avoid this is node, just set node options and then it'll just do the right thing. But being able to wrap around that as npm debug seems powerful. Alternatively, though, maybe it should be node debug or something. I don't know. But like the looking up the bin in the main and like that seems within npm's arena, and whether or not there's a script. So I commented about like there are lots of packages that have both a bin and a main, even though that's not a good practice anymore. And like they'd want to be able to debug both, but that's like a technical type of like that's not a existential question for the RFC. But yeah, so I haven't only looked at this for the last 30 seconds, so I haven't thought about it a lot, but it seems making debugging easier seems valuable. However, you know, we should make sure it's very clear that like this is the proper workflow and this meets the use cases and so on.
Yeah, I think just the setting the environment variable, I'm not sure if they understand that they could do that to work around. Like we don't need less support.
I'll comment
to
that
pass
also.
Through. Yeah, I think that might just be like a gap. Like they are aware of the flag and they don't know that they can pass that through to Node, and they think that we have to like essentially support this, but to pass it through to our process. So that might be the missing piece here, and best left to like them in their environment to be determining how they want to like do telemetry and like debugging of our process. Yeah. Go ahead, Gar, and then Roy.
Just to comment on the part about the bin, I think that needs some rethinking. I don't know if maybe we want to, because node debug, yeah, we need signals to differentiate between exec and run, right? Or because if you do node dot, that's the main. If you do npm exec, that's the bin. And so I would want debug not to muddy those waters. So I would agree with what Jordan said about giving pause to the whole bin thing.
Right, Roy.
Yeah, it's just that in the past, we kind of had other lifecycle scripts like build come up, right? People want to have that as a top level, and we pushed back. So I guess there's got to be a really strong story, like if we want to kind of have this one, but not the other ones, right? Because otherwise, why not have build? Why not have dev?
Open the floodgates, right? Don't even talk about this.
Yeah.
I've thought I've put this to rest a million. I mean, this is what's gonna make me roll in my grave. Don't bring up dev and don't bring up build ever. Those are the two. Yeah. Go ahead, Guy.
If this is something I want my module to provide, is there a way I can do this from an npm script, right? I can create a debug script that calls node with the flags and my local thing, right?
Well, and you could also use the cross-env package to set this environment variable and then call anything else you want. So like, assuming that the environment variable for node options works here, which I think it does, like you could absolutely wrap this up in anything you like.
Also, from what I understood, very quickly parsing through the RFC, it looks like they're proposing like this default kind of behavior when the script is not there, which is already very confusing for Start and everything else today, right? It's very confusing. I know Start has a default, I think it's node index or node server. It's not great. So yeah, there's also that.
Agreed.
Apologies, I was just taking notes. We have 2 minutes left. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get to any other RFCs. What I will say is the next one, which is 610 from Evan Carroll, the parallel script execution when setting when a value is set to an array of text, I don't think we should do any kind of like inference ever with that kind of stuff. We've talked a lot about sort of advanced workflows doing concurrent or parallel execution of scripts. I think that should be like an explicit like opt-in, and I think it has to do with like script execution, which we've also spoken to with like topological ordering with like build scripts and those types of things. I think this probably, I haven't read this, but I think this probably is in line with, you know, adding or introducing a new parallel flag or config to run script and exec and those types of things. Go ahead.
It is.
There's already tools.
Syntax.
Oh, go ahead.
It's a net new syntax. You can't currently set your scripts to an array. So they're saying that that could be the signal. If I've done that, it means run them in parallel.
Go ahead,
But I mean, you can already do this with concurrently or parallel shell, and I'm sure there's others. And then also, both of those have user like UX issues, and like I've seen issues with them where they don't do the right thing when specific subtasks fail. They don't fail the overarching command and so on. Yeah, npm run all. Thank you. So like, I think it's, if there was a like impressive userland solution that a lot of people were using and that always did the right thing with exit codes and that like had worked through these UX issues, then I think it would be a pretty compelling RFC to try and say, let's bake that into npm. But you know, I don't think that exists, and I would love someone to prove me wrong because I need that, but it doesn't exist, I think. So like, I'm really nervous. I'd be really nervous about npm adding it if userland can't even figure it out, because you know, all the folks working on npm and all the folks on this call, like as great as all of us hopefully are, like we're still part of userland. So if nobody's figured it out, how are we gonna, you know?
Well, we can potentially look at, can we be as good as one of those, like the most popular version concurrently, npm run all? Can we provide the same level of value or more, right? Like potentially there is something that we can learn from their implementations that we can do differently that ideally gives you a better outcome as an end user. But I do think this is something that we should try to bake into npm. We've been asked about it so much, and the stats, if you look at concurrently npm run all, a bunch of these, like people want to be able to run their scripts in parallel, and they're looking to other build tools and needing to include new dependencies to do it. And I don't think that there's any reason why we couldn't at least, you know, match the same level of experience people get today, optionally, like opting into that experience, not making it something that's default, right? But yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree that npm should solve this use case, and it's been needed for npm to do it for many years, right? It's but like, if we match, my concern is that if we match the existing thing, like we will end up baking the flaws of the existing tools into npm for the foreseeable future. And I think it's often better to have npm lack the feature than to have npm guarantee the crappy feature, like for example the pre-publish script, right? Like that could have been solved in userland exclusively, and npm would have saved like a decade of problems as a result, but instead tried to bake it in, right?
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there as an example that no one on this call was responsible for.
Yeah, but we don't have to throw any shade anyway. We are.
Fair enough.
Well, we are 2 minutes over. I apologize, folks, if there was something we missed. Hopefully you'll be on next week with us. We will definitely have some more to talk about then. And appreciate everybody jumping on today. Some familiar faces hopefully continue to come. Yeah, I will see you all next week. Cheers.